Greetings all! Yes, we're going to do yet another series of videos from a location, and as you have doubtless surmised from the title of this video, that location is Ireland. The story began about a year ago. Well, actually I guess it began about a quarter century ago when I put on an Irish uniform, but for the purposes of this video, a year ago. The US Army's Armour Branch hosts a competition every year in Fort Moore, and it alternates what that competition is. This year it's the Sullivan Cup, which is a competition for the best tank crews. Last year, however, it was the Gainey Cup, which is a competition to determine the best scout teams. The competitions are open to foreign teams, but there is obviously better participation in the Gainey Cup as it doesn't require knowing how to operate M1 tanks or bring your own tank type along. Now, the Army unfortunately had other plans for me that week, so I was unable to attend most of the event, but I was able to show up for the last day's event, the Final Charge, which of course determined the final standings. The competition was won by the 42nd Brigade Reconnaissance Company of the 13th Light Brigade Royal Netherlands Army, helped out in no small part by this absolute mad lad who completed the 2-mile run way ahead of everyone else, whilst also carrying his buddy's rifle. They had learned last time around that being able to run helps in US Army competitions, and I guess they took that lesson to extremes. I was particularly intrigued, however, when I learned that the Irish Defence Forces had sent a team. The Irish Army has participated in other competitions before, such as Special Forces or sniper contests, but this was the first time they'd done a scout competition in the US. So I grabbed my Glen and decided to give them a little bit of local support. Considering that they had never competed in the competition before and were forced to use US Army rifles instead of their normal AUGs, coming in 10th out of 20 was quite a respectable performance. Not that they were happy with it, mind, their goals were set higher. They do intend to return and knock the Dutch off their pedestal. That also started an evening of drinking. Surprise, surprise. And chatting, and it led to the idea of my swinging by the Irish base in the Curragh and doing this series of videos. The Curragh camp, by the way, is also apparently the largest open access base in Europe. Anyone can just drive on and check it out, although the museum is probably the high point of such a visit. A video on that later. Since this video series is on the Irish Cavalry branch in particular, a quick bit of scene setting is in order. Ireland is a militarily non-aligned nation, meaning it is not part of any military alliances, and it has a general policy of neutrality. The stated mission of the Defence Forces is to defend the state against armed aggression, although given its geographic location and positive relations with its neighbours, that basically means counterterrorism or counterinsurgency more than repelling amphibious invasions. However, it does deploy routinely on United Nations missions. These are normally peacekeeping, but that doesn't necessarily mean peaceful. You may have seen the movie Siege of Jadotville, for example. If sanctioned by the UN, Irish troops have worked alongside US troops on other missions, such as ISAF in Afghanistan. At this time of recording, 88 Irish personnel have been killed on overseas duty since they started UN missions in the 1960s. As a result, the Army retains its configuration with the standard conventional warfighting branches, such as artillery, air defence, and, yes, cavalry. So that's the scene set, and we'll kick off with a quick bit of a history lesson. Greetings all, and welcome to the Curragh camp, the home of the cavalry, and a few other branches, but I don't care about the other branches because I'm Cav. So sitting next to me is Captain Corrigan, who is, I believe your job is in the workshops.
It is at the moment, yeah.
Cav Workshops, but he also happens to have a side gig in knowing a little bit about Irish cavalry history. So we're going to have a little history lesson as to what is the Irish Cav, what makes it special and better than all the other branches. So let's start at, I guess, at the very start. Yeah. Irish Free State shows up, and it's basically devolved from the British Army.
Correct. Yeah. So when the National Army stood up, as you said, a lot of the personnel would have been ex-British Army service personnel, but then on the other side there would have been a lot of the original IRA, separate from later inversions. But
integration must have been interesting.
I'd say it was, yeah. Certainly interesting times. But a lot of the leadership, despite having served with the British Army, they their political loyalties would have been to Ireland, and they for the most part kept a tight ship. In terms of the cavalry, as you said, special from the beginning. So traditionally cavalry, horses. The Irish cavalry never had horses initially. Started off straight away as the Armoured Car Corps from the 14th of September 1922. And right from the get-go, it therefore was one of the most modern branches of service in the world. Small scale, but still quite advanced for the time. So the Cavalry Corps had no horses.
But 1922, that's after the Civil War. During the Civil War?
Yeah, just leading into the Civil War. So during the Civil War, it was formed. So the Civil War was...
Well, here's me showing my lack of knowledge of Irish education. I should bloody know better between the War of Independence and the Civil War, but okay. Yeah.
So the War of Independence would have ended kind of 1919. We'll double check those dates. But during the War of Independence then, the Civil War, the Corps initially wouldn't have existed. They were armoured car detachments, and then on paper they were amalgamated into the Armoured Car Corps on the 14th of September 1922.
And were all the armoured cars on the government side, or did any defect?
They were initially all on the government side. They were provided to the Free State by the British government, direct transfer. Throughout the course of the war, some of them were captured, but generally they either couldn't be maintained, or they just didn't have the resources in terms of fuel and ammunition to maintain them, so they were often destroyed or just left abandoned, and then the Free State would have recaptured them.
And so the Civil War also has, I believe, the first mechanised amphibious assault.
Yes, that's correct.
Ever, anywhere in the world.
Yes, yeah. Another first. Again, slightly prior to the Corps' formation, but they decided to do an amphibious landing in Cork and Kerry, I think it was, around the southwest coast. So they sailed from Dublin on chartered British steamships, and they carried a number of armoured cars, which are eventually unloaded in Cork and other ports in the southwest.
In a somewhat undignified manner. I mean, if you're thinking that the ramp drops and off comes a peerless armoured car, you're wrong.
No, this was a lot of manual labour and crane work, expertise. But it was only small numbers, but they made a significant difference. The Munster Republic, as it was known at the time, had a strong landward defence, so this totally outflanked them, and then the mere mobility of only a handful of armoured vehicles made a significant difference, and then the trained troops of what was the Dublin battalion at the time as well.
And I guess finally the Civil War is also the origin of the Glengarry with the black tails, at least by tradition.
By tradition, but it wasn't actually worn until 1934, when the Corps transitioned to the Cavalry Corps formally. It was deemed the Armoured Car Corps wasn't expansive enough in terms of a title, so they decided to rebrand it the Cavalry Corps. And at the same time, that's when a lot of the actual cavalry traditions that still exist today were formally established. So as you said, that includes the Glengarry. Traditionally, the peak cap was still the standard hat uniform prior to everyone being issued a helmet. But obviously, when you're getting in and out of armoured vehicles, they tend to get crumpled and battered, and it wasn't quite a dignified look. So they went to a Glengarry, which is sort of a soft cap. Yeah. And then the cavalry have black tails, and the rumour is, it's never been confirmed, but the rumour is that's in memory of the loss of General Michael Collins, who
was under cavalry escort at the time.
Well, it's debatable. It was a mixed effort. The cavalry tends to take the blame, but I believe the true history was, if he had taken the advice of the officer commanding the armoured car, he would have been in the armoured car. So, but we won't diminish his memory. I think he's a beloved hero of all corps in the army, shall we say, as the first chief of staff.
So we expanded beyond armoured cars. You had other things. Now, yes. I mean, my first unit were the pedaling panzers on bicycles.
Yes. So we had a number of cyclist squadrons. They were originally in the reserve the reserve elements at the time, and as you said, they were on bicycles. And we might laugh now, but certainly for the time, not everyone could drive. There weren't that many vehicles in the first instance, but cycling is a lot faster than walking on foot. So a lot of people could obviously cycle from being children or just day-to-day lives. So it did provide an actual advantage, and many other European armies also made use of cyclist troops, and we just kind of kept them on it probably a bit longer. But I'm sure we'll come to it later, but during the emergency, a number of squadrons were formed purely based on cyclists. and also a number of horse squadrons were formed, but again, they didn't have any horses, they used bicycles.
So in a lot of countries, cavalry is a very distinct role and it is purely reconnaissance or rapid movement. Yet in Ireland, the cavalry has basically been responsible for all armoured vehicles, including tanks.
Yes, so in the late 1920s and into the 1930s, as doctrine changed and the world began to develop, tanks became more accessible, we slowly branched out, and it was the Cavalry Corps that took the lead. There was some competition from the infantry. I know there was the split in the US and a lot of other countries, but in Ireland it was the cavalry that always took the lead in mechanisation effectively.
And so has the doctrine or role of the cavalry changed between, let's say, 1925 and today, or has the function of the Irish cavalry remained pretty much constant?
It's relatively consistent. I won't say constant. There is always change, but certainly now, as you went through with the Sergeant Major, the Scout course, we have a focus on dismount reconnaissance, kind of post 2010, 2012 reorg. It switched from being, we'd kind of stuck to going back to armoured cars with a single dismount troop per squadron, and then that transitioned more to a focus on more dismounts and less vehicles, and that was just the way procurement went. So when we went to the Moag Piranha, the CRV variant, there was more space in the back and there was less pure crew-only vehicles, and they were finally phased out then in 2013.
So organisationally, you when you had brigades, you would have a cavalry squadron per brigade, and you also had independent squadrons like 1st Tank or 1st Armoured Car.
Yes, so traditionally the brigade is the standard Irish formation. They all had at least one cavalry squadron during the emergency. They could have 2, 3, sometimes more. Some of them would have been what we would call armoured squadrons, so armoured car cavalry squadrons, later renamed motor squadrons in addition, and then also some of the cyclist squadrons formed in. But since the end of the emergency, it's been effectively one squadron per brigade to formation level reconnaissance.
So historically there's always been, except until the Scorpions went away, there was always a few tanks.
Yes.
Not many,
no.
but a few tanks, a few L60s, a few Comets, a few Churchills. What was their function? I mean, if you only have 4 tanks, you're not exactly going to be careening across the battlefield.
No, despite some dreams perhaps, but no. The main purpose before the emergency or the war, the intention was training. So we had the Vickers D. That was the first tank purchased for training, exclusively for training. But then it was realised that, well, armoured vehicles require maintenance. With one of them you can't do a lot. So they purchased a few more. They got 2 L60s, light tanks from Sweden. Kind of as a package, we were purchasing armoured cars there at the same time. Then there was plans to purchase more, but that fell through during the emergency and lack of access. So that was after the emergency. Then we got a few more. We got some Churchills and we got some Comets. There was an attempt to make a formed full squadron, and in name there was 1st Tank Squadron, but really it was a school asset for training, both anti-armour and also for tank support to infantry to give them some kind of exposure. But we obviously never developed a true tank doctrine.
So when you did finally get a full squadron of tanks, the Scorpions, you had 14 of them, give or take. Was that also simply for training purposes, or was that doctrinally supposed to be used as a squadron?
It was doctrinally supposed to be used as a squadron, but times changed and the deployment of them rarely, if ever, took place as a squadron. Troops certainly took part, usually 4 vehicles would take part in quite a lot of exercises around the Curragh, but also up in the Glen, and the small size made them deployable around the country to the various lands, the military training lands. But really it was an internal training asset for the Corps in terms of crew skills and gunnery and weapon skills, but for other branches it wasn't a significant element for their training.
When a unit goes overseas, let's say on a UN mission, they tend to be, at least on the infantry side, a composite unit. They'll take volunteers from multiple different battalions, and they will invent a new battalion for the mission.
Yes, yeah.
Is the cavalry the same? Do you simply take one troop and say you're going?
No, it's a composite unit as well. So usually, while the infantry, the lead unit is always an infantry unit because they're the largest branch, it's a composite unit, but it's drawn from a home battalion. So it's kind of associated with that battalion, even though it's called something totally different. The cavalry troops, there was rotation at times that they went by a troop from each squadron, but then it's much more common that the troop is drawn from the lead brigade, and then it's bumped up with additional personnel from the other squadrons, be it in key roles or just to make up the numbers.
Would it be wrong in saying that the three major engagements of the Cavalry Corps would have been Jadotville, the Tunnel, and At-Tiri?
Yes, yeah. And in terms of remembrance on the cavalry side and what people would think of a cavalry role, At-Tiri would certainly be the most famous.
Okay, so talk about At-Tiri for the 99% of people that have probably never heard of this.
Yeah, so I'd have to check the years, but...
About 81, 82, I think it was.
At-Tiri, it's a small town in what was, and it's currently outside, what was the Irish AO in southern Lebanon, which was a major UN peacekeeping mission that the Irish had been involved in since 1978 and right through to today. But essentially, through a lot of political entanglements, as is always the case in the Middle East, the Israeli Defense Forces had advanced into southern Lebanon right up to Beirut, and there was an ongoing conflict there in the south between Hezbollah and various Lebanese and religious factions in the south, and then also Christian militias that were broadly supported by Israel as well. And essentially, during one of these engagements, the Irish were fired on. The Irish Peacekeeping Patrol was fired on, and an AML-90 returned fire and successfully took out the target.
Which was a half-track in this case.
It was an M3 half-track, but operated by the one of the SLA in southern Lebanon. Yeah.
And the Irish actually took casualty in this as well.
But we took some casualties, yes.
Do deployments today, are they have they become routine as opposed to the challenges or the excitement of the earlier deployments? I mean, UNOC, for example, was quite active.
I think generally a large proportion of each troop are usually fresh. Certainly the troopers are quite usually, this will be their first mission, so it is to them, to some of the older guys and the NCOs, they would have been here, typically Lebanon is our only mission currently now, with UNDOF in Syria ending. But I suppose there's always a risk, like as you can see the current situation that started in October in Gaza, that has effects on northern Israel and southern Lebanon as well. Certainly the troops that are stationed there at the moment spend a number of hours, maybe not every day, but certainly a number of hours every week in the bunkers. So that the threat is always there.
Doesn't that kind of kill the point of peacekeeping though? I mean, surely when the shooting starts is when peacekeeping needs to happen.
Yes, well I think presence is a factor in and of itself. The fact that we are there probably means it happens less than it would otherwise.
The current cavalry fleet consists of Moag APCs, Toyota Land Cruisers, am I wrong?
The Sofskin are just a squadron asset. They're not really
so they're not used for dismounted reconnaissance?
Not doctrinally, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Dismount, the APC and then dismount is currently the primary roles of the squadrons, yeah.
As the Irish Defence Forces have reorganised over time, back in my day, there were the four commands.
Yes.
And now you've gone down to a couple of brigades, and I presume the cavalry have shrunk accordingly. So what's left?
They have, yeah. So at the moment, the Defence Forces in general, obviously there's the Air Corps, the Naval Service, there's 2 Army brigades, and then there's a central Defence Forces training centre where we are now. In terms of the Cavalry Association then, each brigade still has a cavalry squadron. So 2 Brigade, the old Eastern Command, still has the 2nd Cavalry Squadron, and it now has an integrated reserve element. There's no longer any reserve squadrons. In the south then, we have the 1st Brigade.
So to be clear, an integrated reserve element is like you got two troops of PDF and one troop of reservists?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's replicated then in the Southern Brigade with the 1st Cavalry Squadron in Collins Barracks in Cork. And then in the Curragh Camp, we have the 1st Armoured Cavalry Squadron, also with integrated reserve elements. The Cavalry School is here. And then within the broader Defence Forces vehicle-based workshops, there's an armoured section, which it's largely composed of cavalry personnel.
So if there's, let's say, on or about 9,000 people in the army, how many of them will be cavalry?
Less than 500, yeah.
So a small but proud force.
Absolutely, yeah.
So getting up from the table for a second, you may have seen in the background the shield and colours. So why don't we have a quick look at what these are?
So the cavalry crest, as I said, was designed in 1934. It represents the various elements of the cavalry corps and what they're meant to embody. So first foremost is the cuirass, the armour to represent the fact that the vehicles are armoured. Then we have a sabre, a traditional cavalry weapon. The rifle to represent the traditional dismounted history of the corps, and it's a Lee Enfield 303, which was the standard service rifle for all branches of the Defence Forces at the time. And then the tyre is actually to represent mobility, and it's a Rolls-Royce tyre to represent the most iconic vehicle of the armoured vehicle of the Defence Forces at the time and probably still today.
And we have our pennant that you shamelessly nicked off the British.
Absolutely. Well, we changed the colours a little bit there. Theirs is brown, red and green, so we went with black, red and green. And to be honest, I think the black looks a lot nicer. But the motto is the same, so it's through the mud and the blood to the green fields beyond. Obviously the British had that from the First World War, where the tanks broke through the mud and the blood to get to the green fields on the far side.
Why did you decide to join the Cav? I presume you had a wish list when you came out of cadet school.
Oh, even before cadet school. So when you go in for your cadet training, I'm a history kind of guy, so I have a lot of interest in history and military topics anyway. So I went to the military. And in cadets, within the first few weeks, I outright said I wanted to go to the cavalry. And that was just to my friends and colleagues, fellow cadets. And then 16 months later, my dream came true, and I entered the Cav. So that was always my intention, and here I am now.
No regrets yet?
No regrets, no. I've had a very interesting and mixed career. I've been overseas twice so far, and going again soon. So I think I've had a very lucky and interesting and diverse career. So.
Are you married?
Nope, not at the moment.
All right, so the deployments aren't quite so much of a hassle
for
you
yet. Not yet, yeah.
What do you wish you had known about the army before you joined it?
I don't know, I think, as I said, I had a deep interest in the military before. Mm-hmm. I think you still learn something maybe not every day, but every week certainly. I think sometimes the unknowns can be just as enjoyable as the knowns, so yeah.
What has surprised you most about the army?
I think the people. I'm sure everyone says that the people are great in every job they work in, or they tend to, certainly for videos like this. But I think the individuals definitely, they make the organisation, and maybe that's not always portrayed in the videos and the PR. For recruitment and stuff, you don't always actually really get to see the people. There's amazing characters in the organisation. Unfortunately, those have left, even some who've died. So it's just, I think the people, yeah.
All right. Well, that was a good enough talk. So there you go. Hopefully you all learned something. And there is plenty more to come from the Curragh. So stay tuned. Click the subscribe button. You know, all the usual deal that every YouTuber says. So please do that. All right. I'll talk to you then.